Peace and blessings. This is Art and Hustle. My name is Carlos Walker, and today we are with Mr. Donovan X. Ramsey. How you doing, sir?
I'm good, Carlos. How are you?
Man, loving life, man. Hey, enjoying being here.
Amen.
So, if you will, before we get into this, share who you are and what you do.
Absolutely. I'm an author and a journalist, and I have written almost exclusively about the experiences of Black people in this country, including, a focus on the criminal legal system. And most recently, I'm the author of my first book, When Crack Was King, which is a people's history of the crack epidemic of the 80s and 90s.
Okay. So, what we'll do, dive into the book, but also into why you created the book.
Mhm.
I know it's documenting history, but I like to get into the psychological part of why people did do certain things.
Absolutely. Well, so to start with, really, grew up, I think, like a lot of millennials in the 80s and 90s, in an environment that was uh, really impacted by the crack epidemic. Both my community, and my family, but also the neighborhood that I grew up in Columbus, Ohio. So, even in the Midwest, that was an issue that we had. And, for me, it wasn't something necessarily that adults talked freely about.
Mhm.
What was going on when certain people disappeared from the neighborhood, or why we didn't talk to certain relatives anymore. um, Something that I don't write about in the book is that my first bike was stolen by an addict,
Mm.
which was very sort of traumatic for me. It was taken from me by an addict. um, so I had all those experiences growing up. And when I got to be older, I was blessed enough to find my way into a career that I love in journalism. Um, and my focus was always on people that were misunderstood and that were marginalized, because those were the people that I grew up with and around. So that was who I wanted to report on. And as time went by, I realized that there wasn't enough, I didn't feel like, honest and thorough conversation about that period that was so impactful for so many people. That there wasn't, an official book, an official history. So I decided that I had to be the person to write that history.
Appreciate that because it needed to be documented. The things that our community has been through going through the crack epidemic. People like today they're talking about what is it? The now I don't want to say heroin, but you know the
The opioids.
yeah, the opioid. That's the word I was looking for. The opioid epidemic. But we know we don't shed light on what happened to our community. So like I was saying, it's important that we document this stuff because if you don't, it'll just go in like it never happened.
Hmm. Yeah, that is exactly true. That people will end up, I think, as many of us have, living with the consequences of that era without necessarily having the details that we need and the information to understand what it was we went through. So, the book, as I wrote it, I knew that it couldn't just be a straight up and down history, sort of a telling of crack's rise and fall, which does make up sort of what I call the, like, spine of the book. But the real heart of it is the four individuals whose lives I follow throughout the book. And they're all over the country. There's a woman named Lenny Woodley who was an addict for decades, for over 30 years. A man named Sean McCrae, who was a dealer out of Newark, New Jersey. A man named Kurt Schmoke, who was the mayor of Baltimore during the crack epidemic. And a man named Elgin Swift, whose father was an addict. And together, what I hope to do was to sort of paint a picture from different perspectives of
Hmm.
how the epidemic was experienced, and hopefully help people to kind of see themselves or some version of their story in each of those characters.
Vantage Point. I forgot the actual movie it was called. It may have been Vantage Point, but you showing from each perspective, whether it's a family member who has been impacted, you're
Hmm.
showing it from the person who has been the addict, also from the drug dealer and a mayor over a city,
Hmm.
and how they all had to cope, try to work around these things. You're showing every aspect of people's lives. Is nobody that can't feel it or feel some point of it. I got to give you an applaud because to me, being perspective is everything.
Yeah.
And when you are able to get the right perspective, whether it's on your personal life or just life in general, you go from being, because I like to say it's two sides to every coin. You go from being either a victim to a triumphant being, or
Mm.
you'll stay at it as a victim and never be able to triumph to the person you should be. And it ain't that
Hmm.
you ain't a victim. It's just the fact that how do you take your story and make it into purpose?
Yeah. No, that is exactly right. That it's why I think I chose storytelling to begin with, because when you are um, a person who has been marginalized, who doesn't necessarily have a whole lot of power, everything can feel like it's just happening to you and without a whole lot of order. But storytelling is what we do as human beings. It makes us special in that we are able to order our lives through storytelling. You know, even when we go to sleep, our brain tries to tell us stories, you know, through dreams to help us out. So I think that's why I was attracted to journalism as a profession, because it is a way to it is a professionalized, form of storytelling, and I'm happy as the journalist that I am, given where I come from, to be able to apply um, all my techniques, all my skills to telling our stories the best that I can.
And I thank you for that. Because even looking at your book, you took the same route with doing it. You just told their stories, which is part of your journalistic ability, was to, I'm going to capture this whole story, but how do I do it?
Hmm.
And instead of, like you said, just going running the story from point A to point B, point Z, you say, you know what? What I'm going to do, I'm going to bring people in and separate the people. That's to me that is ingenious how you done it. The reason because how else do you tell a story? I
Hmm.
can go one on one with one person, but to show it from four different vantage points, it gave the brilliance. And now you can see even though we are in the opioid crisis and still in the crack epidemic, what we get to do is I get to relate even to this group of people what it's like to be from this era and still be in this era depending on where you're at.
Hmm. Yeah,
So
thank you, man. I like appreciate you appreciating that about the book, because um, I have realized as a journalist, because it's a practice that's so based on official records and official facts and documents, that often what gets left out is memory, which is how people build together history. And memory is just as important as the way something happened in an official document, because it still impacts people's lives. But of course, memories differ. Like you said about vantage point, depending on where you're standing, you have access to different information. But what we, especially as Black folks, have done is that we always share notes. You
Mm,
know, that if you're from, let's say New York, and you happen to be with a black person who is from, Memphis, right? That you're going to try to figure out points of common connection.
mm,
Maybe it's family names, maybe it's prominent people that maybe that or experiences that you've been through. And so the book is a reflection of that kind of conversation,
mm.
a sharing of notes across identities, but also locations.
Just to your point, culture always kind of is what bridges us. Even
Hmm.
though some of the stuff may be, it may vary, because like I'm from the South. Where are you from?
I'm from
Oh,
Ohio.
yeah, you just told me Columbus, Ohio.
Uh-huh.
And whether it be the way some of our grandparents may have cooked, whether it may be it's certain stuff that connects or bridge us as a community, where no matter where you're from, you have some type of bridge or something. And even from your book standpoint, everybody can name probably at least one person that has been infected by the crack epidemic in their community, especially if
Hmm.
you're black. It could be an uncle, aunt, cousin. Somebody might not be the closest relative. It could be a friend, but it has affected your community in some aspect, or your family. And that's one of the reasons why when I came across your name and came across your book, I was like, hold up, I got to have him, because hey, it's listen to what the book stand for. When crack was king,
Yeah.
and crack literally, it affected, for just say, it still shows the effects of it now.
Hmm.
Community, you still got people who are still in prison. Like I told you, I did 13 years in prison because of crack.
Hmm.
And was given a 20-year mandatory minimum sentence because of it, and came out in 2019. But like I was telling you, yes, I am a victim. We didn't put the stuff in our communities. We know how this stuff now ended up in our communities. CIA had a big portion of it. However, what do you do, or how do you take this experience and make it into power, or make it into purpose? And I always tell people about my past to show them where my present is at.
Hmm.
And that is pretty much how you are utilizing this story. You are fast forwarding it, allowing people to see the past and our present, that it may better our future. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
if you will, share a little bit about. I know you wanted to document, but why is the reason that you chose to create this book, personally?
Yeah. I personally chose to create this book because I think that it is a story that is long overdue. And what it brought out of me was a type of empathy that I didn't know I had before, and that I think in many ways I was trained out of exercising as a journalist.
Mm,
Uh, a ability to connect with the people that I was writing about, and also to write about myself, which I, had never done. In the intro and the end of the book, I, write about both my background, but then also my experiences putting the book together, which also taught me a lot about the crack epidemic. I started breaking out into hives, and I had terrible anxiety um, and I think in some cases PTSD um, from listening to the stories. I traveled across the country to all the hardest hit cities, about 10 cities in total, well, over 10 cities. And I interviewed hundreds of people, often about the worst things that happened to them. And it reminded me of so many things growing up. Uh, you know, People shooting and having to like get down, on the floor, and that just being like a normal thing, that we did, in my home. or having the house broken into, or the relatives, that we lost to addiction. Um, all of that was very traumatizing,
Mm-hmm.
and I didn't realize it until I started working on the book, then I realized how much of that stuff had been buried, even though it was impacting the work that I was doing. It was impacting the way that I interacted with people. It was making me, I think, very uh, I don't want to say cutthroat, but I will say that when you grow up in a rough environment, no matter where you go, the sort of fancy schools that I've been to, or some of like the fancy places that I've been able to work, you still have a little edge,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and you're going to always be a little skeptical and cautious, and and I have all that, and now I understand better how much of that is me and how much of it is really just what I've been through. And so that's what the book gave me. I didn't know that that was why I was writing it,
Mm-hmm.
but I think that I wanted to better understand, um, my hustle, which is a part about ambition, but also a part about fear, of returning back to that situation. Um, Help me understand, and it's something that I hope people who read the book that experience the crack epidemic get, that you'll better understand some of the fears that you have related to that era, but that also you'll be able to understand some of the strengths,
Mm-hmm.
because the real moral of the story is that we survived that period, and we survived it without a whole lot of compassion or help, but usually through a network of community.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, whether it's grandmothers that took in grandchildren, while their kids ran the street, or if it was community organizations, or if it was, OGs that kind of told you, don't do this, do that. Literally a network of people and loving actions that keep you alive. That's probably stronger than any government policy. And they keep you alive long enough for the storm to pass over. That they don't end the storm because we don't have that much power, but we can keep each other alive. So I wanted to honor that in my own story. And also, I wanted to honor that in our shared experiences as a people.
You can really, going back and looking, you can really see how God has had His hands all over us. It's it's mind blowing for a people to be oppressed even in that way. But as you just said, learn to come together and still make it through. That's mind blowing. Uh, I guess what the last question I asked you, what is, if you could give a word of wisdom to somebody who is either just starting off as an author, who have been in the author game, or just in life period, because every journey has its ups, downs, everything. What would be the word of wisdom?
My word of wisdom would be, write to the person that needs to hear what you have to say the most. So if you get stuck, trying to figure out what's the next sentence, or what's the next chapter, or the next paragraph, you have to think about who needs to read this. Sometimes it's a younger version of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's a parent. Sometimes it is a child. Uh, but if you say, how would I explain this to my mom? It's an immediately clarifying question. If you say, what does my child need to know about this? Immediately clarifying. So that's my first piece of advice. My second piece of advice is uh, this is kind of weird, but write for the aliens.
Mm,
And by that, what I mean is, I don't know how much longer this country will be around,
mhm.
in this situation that we live in, and industry and libraries and bookstores. All of this stuff is is shifting. But one day, when all this is over, right, we deserve to have an accurate record of our lives here. And the media hasn't done that, you know? That I don't trust media as it has been to tell our story, certainly not to tell my story. So one of the reasons to write and something that can guide you in your writing is, what if this is the one book that they find 1,000 years from now? How can you tell the truth in a way that will be helpful? So if that doesn't inspire you to write, listen to music. And music will help you too.
And I know I said that would be the last question. What made you choose the title?
Okay. Um, when Crack Was King was a contentious decision with my publisher, but I really pushed for it because I wanted something that evoked the the scale of the problem, or really just of the time. I wouldn't even make it specifically the problem of addiction, but um, all the things about how it was experienced. So there was a phrase in the antebellum South. It was King Cotton,
Mm-hmm.
and that phrase, was a reference to how important cotton was to America's economy. That it could be the reason to start a war. It fueled an economy. So for me, when I was trying to think about how to describe the crack era, I thought about crack being king, that it fueled an economy, and it was big enough to start a war.
And it fueled or a war over in what was the Contra War?
It did, yeah, absolutely, in Nicaragua.
Yep. So it's I like the parallel. The parallel actually
Thank you, man.
shows when cotton was king, but when crack became. And the other parallel is that they both had something to do with black people.
Hmm.
That's
Yep.
mind blowing.
Yeah, So that was my goal for it, and I hope even if people don't know that specific piece of history from reading it, that they're still able to walk away with that impression.
I thank you for this. Uh, Especially being one who went to prison because of it, one who sold a bulk of it, and like I said, came out triumphant because of the way life evolved.
Hmm.
I am grateful for the book, and I will make sure I go purchase this book because when I heard it, when I read the back of it, it's mind blowing. And I
Thank
pray
you, man.
much success come to you for the book, that you be that God allowed you to be in rooms that you need to be to express this, to be able to tell and talk about this because it's not talked about the way it should be. And you've dialogued and documented the history of it.
Thank you, Carlos, and thank you for having me. It's always good to have these conversations with people who understand exactly what I'm talking about. It is for me. It's a part of how we built the history. Besides writing the books, right, is to also then take them into community and to engage about it. So thank you for the opportunity.
It's an honor, man. Hey, thank you for your journalism. So
Thanks.
this is Art and Hustle, Black Authors Matter. He is Mr. Donovan X Ramsey. My name is Carlos Walker, and thank y'all for joining.